We are not all attorneys, although there may be some on, not tonight though, I don't think. Everything discussed is personal opinions and may not stand up. Our hope is that we can open these discussions up to a broader audience and have these ideas recorded for the next generation. There are some high profile boundary surveyors and some even college students from across the country on the Zoom. And I hope that we can all gain a bit of knowledge from these discussions. So tonight is chapter 16. Yeah.
Yep.
Professional liability. Should be an interesting one, right? Like always being the most professional that we can, but kind of running into that. So what do you got to open up the discussion, Mr.
Yeah, well, what I think I want to do maybe, and if everyone's okay with that, is we'll probably match 16 and 17 together as I was re-reviewing it this week. I didn't get a note out to you, Trent.
Yeah,
so
no,
we can notice that, but here's the thing, professional liability, and then 17 is professional stature, right? And so these go, the discussions I think is going to lend hand in hand anyways.
Perfect.
But the liability side is definitely going to be a bigger discussion because that's going to be very state dependent. I mean, we have a professional liability standard of care and we can talk about that, but then, you know, those like John that are more familiar with other state statutes and just us as a group in different states can talk about it. But that's going to be a very localized discussion when you get down to the actual details of it. But the hope is maybe in this discussion we talk about what makes us professionals and what we can draw out of these chapters as far as that goes. So let's do it like we always do. Let's just start there on chapter 16. There's 10 principles to go through and see what we can come up with for talking points. Principle 1, the discovery rule as applied to land surveyors means that the statute of limitations for liability commences to run from the time the alleged error is discovered or after a client should have known or became aware of an error. Principle number 2, surveyors are expected to perform with the same degree of care and skill as a fictitious, reasonable person within the same profession. Principle 3, the surveyor is liable for damages arising from expressed guarantees and from damages arising from implied guarantees expected of the profession. There is a law permitting the surveyor to trespass when necessary to do a survey. The surveyor can be held liable for damages of trespass, either compensatory or punitive, and that's one that I definitely want to hit on today. There's some changes in Utah law recently with that. Principle 5, to avoid liability, the professional surveyor should do more than the ordinary prudent surveyor would do under similar circumstances. Principle 6, to prove professional negligence, one must show 4 elements. 1, a standard or duty exists within the profession. 2, the surveyor breached that standard or duty. 3, that breach was the proximate cause of the damage. And 4, actual damages resulted. Principle 7, if a surveyor can be proven negligent in the performance of his or her duties, punitive damages may be awarded in addition to actual and contract compensatory damages. Principle 8, a surveyor should not contract to do work for which he or she is not qualified, educated, and experienced to accomplish. Principle 9, a surveyor can be sued either in tort or in contract. With a written contract, the terms of the contract become the controlling elements. Principle 10, the use of another surveyor's work that is found to be substandard does not relieve the second surveyor from liability for the substandard work of the first surveyor. The liability will attach to the surveyor who uses any work product that is erroneous. So any of that pop out to you guys, wants to talk about, kind of hit on it a little bit closer?
Well, the one that always points out to me, that jumps out to me, is when we talk about the reasonable person, because I don't know of a single example where that reasonable person ever makes a mistake. I'm just throwing that out. And I do also want to point out that Principle 2 and Principle 5 were reworded differently in prior versions of the book, which is what I'm using. I think I'm using the 5th edition. It doesn't say reasonable person in 2, it says professionals in the same, or it says others in the same profession or expertise. And so it doesn't say reasonable person. If 2 is saying that we need to meet the reasonable person standard, and 5 is saying that we need to meet or do what an ordinarily prudent surveyor would do, isn't that technically the same thing? But words will matter here. In a court, reasonable man means something different than an ordinarily prudent surveyor. That's what's popping out to me.
I love that. So let's throw that out there. I caught that too. I didn't catch it from the other books, but I did catch the reasonable person versus a professional surveyor or surveyor. So is are we lowering the standard there a little bit?
Yeah, the way I've always understood it to be is that the reasonable man theory applies to every kind of a court case that has any kind of a negligence. And it's the layman perspective. What would a reasonable person have done in similar circumstances, which brings in principle 5. And when they start talking about a professional surveyor in principle 5, professionals are elevated to a higher degree of expectation than the normal man, the normal person, the average man or the reasonable man. So it takes the reasonable man theory and elevates it to what is expected of a professional in like or similar circumstances. So there is a little bit of a distinction, I think, between the two. If you were testifying as a fact witness in a situation, you'd be looking at the reasonable man theory. What, somebody looking at this, what would they think? And applied strictly to the layperson perspective. But then the professional is always held to a higher degree of standard than that reasonable man. And so you got the two things kind of working together, but one's, I think, an elevation of the other.
Okay, well, let's throw. Oh, go ahead, Connie.
The way principle 2 versus principle 5 are juxtaposed in my mind right now is the surveyor is expected to perform within the same degree of care and skill as fictitious reasonable person within the same profession, meaning a reasonable surveyor, which to me sounds like average performance, or almost maybe minimum to average, basically what happens ordinarily and every day. Principle 5 addresses what a surveyor should do in order to avoid a liability. And what happens on average everyday work is people do make mistakes. If you want to avoid liability, then you need to put forth the effort to perform at the higher standard so that you avoid as many errors and mistakes as possible that will create liability for you, and therefore pushing those standards up.
Good point.
So what makes us professionals then? What sets us apart or defines a professional?
I don't think he meant on principle 5. I think the professional surveyor, I don't think the emphasis was meant to be on a professional surveyor versus, I don't know, the ordinary or non-professional surveyor. I think that it just means a surveyor as a professional should think of the liability pretty much at all times and elevate their daily efforts to the level that is going to mitigate the average errors, the ordinary errors made by other professionals.
Yep, that's fair. I'm asking that question more from a standpoint of we call ourselves, depending on the state, a professional land surveyors. So what makes us professional land surveyors? Legal definition or state definition.
Yeah, I mean,
Or that
everybody
licensure.
licensed is allowed to call themselves a professional as part of the noun in their name, but to act in a more professional manner as an attribute to you being a surveyor, that's now we're speaking of actions rather than a title.
I agree with that. And let's not just construe that to mean that a professional surveyor just simply makes fewer mistakes. There's liability in everything we do. A lot of it is just a question of whether or not we're likely to be sued because of it. And I think that kind of gets to another principle 6. I mean, was our error, or was our oversight, or was our work approximate cause of damages? And you know, at one point I was thinking, Connie, when you were talking about that, it almost sounds like if we're being chased by a bear, I just have to run faster than you. But no, that's not the real thing. It's a question of,
You want to avoid
like,
triggering the bear.
yeah, and like John was saying, and you were saying, elevating what a minimum standard surveyor would do. I think that would be the reasonable person. What's the minimum standard for someone who has that license versus someone who is doing a little bit extra to elevate their work above that minimum standard? Kind of getting to what John was saying. Still waiting for that example of a reasonable man that makes a mistake, though, because they certainly do.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, in my head, it's like, if you shoot for the average, you're probably going to undershoot it. If you shoot way higher and you make a few errors along the way, you're still going to probably end up a little bit above the average. That puts you in a safer zone. But if you're just shooting for the average, you know, your risk goes way up. Your liability potential goes way up. So whether that's being done by accident or deliberately or financially driven, you know, that's a whole different discussion. So I think that's where they're possibly trying to make the distinction in principles 2 and 5.
Okay, let's jump down. I want to read out of the book here. Trent, if you run down to 16.4, where they actually introduce principle 2 and the work underneath that. That first paragraph says, by virtue of their license, surveyors are not restricted in the areas in which they may practice. A surveyor licensed in his or her respective state has the ability to practice in all areas of land surveying. The professional may perform property surveys, GPS observations, first order leveling, LiDAR scanning, and in some states drainage and percolation studies, all under the umbrella of a professional land surveying license. While it is legally permissible to undertake all of these different land surveys, once a surveyor undertakes any project outside of his or her area of surveying expertise, the courts will assume that the surveyor will practice with competence and diligence when doing so. That means that the surveyor will exhibit a degree of skill, care, and ability equal to or above the minimum requirements of that type of surveying. No quarter will be given to surveyors who conduct certain classes of surveyors only incidental to their general practice.
Which means the court's going to look at you and say, I don't care if you're a newbie to doing a boundary survey. You should have known from the beginning what you were getting into. And that's the risk management that you've accepted. And you better know how to do it right, or you're going to get in trouble.
Yep. I mean, this is where I want to, you know, why I ask the question, what makes us professionals? You know, let's look at a professional engineer, for example. I mean, in engineering, and just like surveying, but I think it's more distinct in engineering because you actually get licensed. As you take that licensure test, there are different umbrellas you specifically test under, right? And you say, I'm specializing in this. And surveying is a very general profession. You know, I one of the things I love is that I do 15 different, I have to know 15 different things any given day, right? I have to understand how the architect does his job. So as I'm doing some sort of boundary survey or construction staking with an architectural plan in mind, right? I've got to understand the language they speak, or a civil plan and a civil engineer. I've got to understand transportation, highway, and all that stuff if I'm doing that. I have to understand history and law, and you know, so there's a lot more that we don't specialize or test specialize in, but yet we're still held. Surveyor's a surveyor, and then we have to purposely navigate where we we localize our work. I saw a chat pop up there. Jason asked, would this cover you if you were practicing in meteorology using your license as a direct relationship to the umbrella of your license?
Metrology?
Metrology. I'm not sure. Metrology, what do you mean there, Jason? So that decides so I can pay attention to that. So any other questions, discussions on what, when we let him answer, what the standard of care is, what it is to be a professional, and some of that liability that we've been talking about. Kind of move on to some other portions of it.
There's another thought that I'd like to share regarding the standard of care. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, very far from it, but my understanding is that the laws always tend to play catch up with actual conditions in professions and on the ground in technology. And probably for example, the surveying is getting more and more complicated as technology develops, and we as professionals are leading the way in understanding how to use that technology and when not to use it, and that all carries additional liabilities that laws have not caught up to tell us exactly what to do. However, if we misuse them, if we perform misfeasance or malfeasance, we're still going to be held liable.
I think that's one of the things that sets us aside as professionals. I mean, there are surveyors out there, I'm going to speak very generally when I say this, but there are surveyors out there that simply survey. But there are surveyors out there that get involved in their state society, are active in promoting it, in legislating it. And the one I wanted to talk about and touch on is principle, it's the trespass. So in this last legislative session in Utah, we had an interesting little discussion and some laws that happened about trespassing. And John, you probably could speak more eloquently to it than I can, being part of the legislative committee and active in that. But the idea was, what was presented was, in the new technology, scanning, drone work, and gathering information on adjacent properties, not our own, having that then become a trespass because you're taking this detailed data from someone else's property. John, do you mind speaking a little bit what happened there, what the law was, and kind of where we ended in Utah?
Yeah, it started out as someone concerned about somebody flying a drone over their property and gathering their personal information or data about their property or what their goings on their property, and they wanted to make a criminal trespass for gathering data when you were gathering data on property that wasn't your own. Well, the surveyors, we stepped right in there very quickly and said, "Whoa, wait a minute." They started looking at it and saying, "Yeah, okay. If you're in the law enforcement, you get an exception." And yeah, surveyors, they gave us a specific exception as surveyors that when we're gathering data for projects, even though we overlap that data onto adjoining properties that are not our client or not owned by our client, that it's okay, we can gather that data, but then we have to trim out anything that's not essential to the project before we can deliver the project. And then it was reduced not as a criminal trespass, but just a misdemeanor trespass. But basically, you'd have to be careful when you submit your data that you're not overextending your perimeters and including information that's not necessary for your project. And then it could be, say a drainage issues, from neighboring properties coming onto your project. Well, yeah, you've got to deal with that. And that might be part of the project, so therefore it is included. But Yeah, it was a kind of a scramble to get the exception for surveyors, and we ended up really kind of um, almost broadening it out now to where we can gather that data without having to worry about a criminal trespass or any kind of a trespass action. So it kind of almost ended up with a could have been very bad, and I think it turned into something fairly good.
There's one similar going in Wyoming right now. Yeah, that's what I
Mm.
just pulled up. They got the same situation going. So
How
Yeah,
interesting
well,
for
we might
years
want
and
to look at
years.
our language.
How interesting for years and years we fly, aerial mapping, and got to do a strip so many feet wide, and
Mhm.
we overlap into people's backyards all the time on a regular basis, and nothing's been said until now that the drones became popular slash unpopular, and now we
Mhm.
have this legislation going on.
yep.
Yeah, we have these overreactions
Right,
and
knee-jerk
kickbacks.
reactions to it all.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
This one died at committee though. So the
I
Wyoming one did.
I do know for us, I don't get extensively involved with our LiDAR and drone flying, but I do peripherally to a point where I was able to learn, for example, when we do fly something with a drone, some of the issues, even if you're not in restricted airspace, is that you're able to get a lot higher resolution imagery, and it being oblique, you can, accidentally get imagery in somebody's house and whatnot. And
mhm.
that what John was pointing out, there's the non-essential data. And then also, for example, what I've seen a lot of companies don't follow this, but we are also prohibited to use the data obtained in aerial survey to use it for anything but the aerial surveying itself. So we can't take the image that we've taken with a drone during the time of aerial survey and use it to create a LinkedIn post, for example, for self-promotion, because different rules apply for commercial photography for advertising versus a drone flying for surveying purposes.
Interesting. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with some of those differences and whether that's in California or Utah, but interesting
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah,
Jason
and then
asked, what about Google Earth and near map? And I think the discussion in Utah was
Yeah.
what is the level of detail and the use of that? With a scanner, you get a lot more detail. You're up close and in there.
Yeah, and they made an exception too for um, state agencies and stuff like that that are doing flights. And like Utah, they purchase Google imagery from Google, and so yeah, it's under contract now with the state for them to gather this data or to share data. Um, yeah, and all of those conversations all kind of came up as what about, um, because it's just not a simple approach, not simple idea. Um, you want to protect privacy of individuals, and it's part of their property rights too that are associated as well. But um, and the bill was also geared quite a bit about LiDAR, which was kind of surprising. More in the LiDAR, they were more concerned with LiDAR than they were concerned about the photography, the actual imagery. Um, but the two of them were kind of tied in there together. But it started out as pretty much strictly LiDAR, and I thought that was kind of weird. But you can't.
Well,
It's kind of hard to see much private information on LiDAR unless you've got holes in your backyard that you haven't filled yet.
yeah. Well, and I think that Connie was kind of talking about talking about these changes in it, right? As this technology, the laws catch up with technology, so as we can be on the forefront, we see this. I think that's important to know. I want to read this paragraph under 16.8, and then I've got another question about liability and the trespass damages. It says most surveyors assume the right to go into the land of others. Unless there is a law giving the surveyors this right of entry, such right does not exist. Even if a law does give a right of entry, the surveyor at no time can damage the vegetation existing on the land. brush cutting, or line of sight clearing may result in a damage claim. At common law, any unauthorized trespass into the invisible bounds of a parcel of land is a common law tort or civil wrong. When it is determined that the trespass was unauthorized, a court will consider the person's ability to pay when it awards damages. In Indiana, a total of $420 compensatory damages and $100,000 punitive damages were awarded to the landowner as a result of a power company's survey crew illegally removing corn to clear a line of sight. This reward was made even though the power company was in the process of establishing what it wanted to take under eminent domain.
Wow.
So we understand this, but
That's
we
harsh.
sit very comfortably and today very warm in our offices. It's snowing again in Utah. But we have crews out there. So what discussions are you guys having with your survey crews as a professional land surveyor in charge? How are we training and talking to our crews about their responsibility? Because I've got one crew that, or I've had crews that will say, okay, it's off property. I can't go hit that section corner. I can't do it. I can't do my job. I'm not going to trespass. I'm not going to do it. And I've got other crews that say, oh, no one's home. I'm just going to go back in the backyard and get what I need, right? Two very different attitudes. And I think we could discuss where they fall on this law, but how are we having those discussions and trainings with our crews?
On that same note, there was actually a Facebook post earlier this week, or maybe over the weekend. Did you happen to see one about someone posting a picture of the map and it said could not set corner because of corner vegetation at the corner or whatever, right? And so the guy who posted that picture then was like, I was able to just pull back the brush and the original corner was still there. And so the first surveyor didn't even look under the brush to begin with, and then second surveyor, just pulled it back and was able to do it. So along those same, conversations, I think it's probably, for us, maybe in the West, we're not necessarily cutting line, more so some like the East Coast surveyors, right? So I think it's probably a different conversation between East and West for sure on that instance, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we always have that discussion of go knock on doors. That's part of our job, right? Is hey, we're doing a survey in the area. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Get permission. If it's a critical stuff, we'll send out letters. I think we've talked about that in other chapters here, but sending out letters or those type of things to try and get their involvement in the survey.
We talked to our crews about doing just that, knocking on the door, being polite, but also carrying our card, have them call the manager. But I think it comes down to personality a lot. And we've seen that if we know it's going to be dicey, we send a certain party chief there. We had a party chief last week get accosted by somebody, and by the time he was done talking to it, the guy pulled out his ATV and drove him around all day. So just because he's such a nice person. So
right.
I think it's different person to person.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
in California, we have certain bits and pieces of this codified where we have the right of entry. We're not required to notify homeowners, property owners. However, where practical, every effort should be made to notify landowners. I forget if some days in advance and whatnot. How we translate that into practice is on every project, we have a discussion about what it takes to enter the property, who we need to contact, how we need to arrange it, what the conditions are on the ground, and also, how much is acceptable amount of digging to recover the corners, in order to create or not create damage to either the property or the street. And speaking of Facebook, there's some discussions we've had with people on Facebook where they say, well, you're not supposed to dig, break the pavement in certain areas in the street. Well, in California, at least where I practice, if you're not at least breaking the pavement to find a spike and washer in the middle of the street, then you're going to be negligent as a surveyor, and you're expected to cut a hole and and find a monument. But I think to offset that, we also have the law that, and I forget where in the code, I don't know if that's somewhere in the civil code, I believe, that it's the property owner's the monument preservation is ultimately the property owner's responsibility. So that way, if you do have to break ground to dig out the corner, the property owner can't, you're supposed to make every effort to bring it close back to the original state, but obviously you're not required to repave and patch up the street. You're required to refill it back and hard pack it so that you're not leaving an open hole in the ground. And same when you're accessing the property, private property, you except for the area where you need to dig up the monument, you're expected to be very prudent and careful not to damage anything on a property. So, if you knock over a planter or break something while you're walking to the corner, you're going to be liable for that because it's negligence. But the fact that you may have to possibly break pavement in somebody's brand new driveway that he paved over a monument, that's not necessarily the surveyor's liability, because it's the property owner's responsibility to have not paved over the monument and raised it to grade or rehabilitated it in some way prior to paving over it.
And we're seeing laws, county laws specifically in Utah, that are starting to address that. Weber County, one of the northern counties in Utah, has actually tied into the utility locate service, so that anytime a utility locate happens, they get notified of that as if they were a utility, and they can check to see what monuments are in the area, and they'll actually send out letters to that contractor making them aware of, hey, there's a section corner in here, here's our corner record, here's a fee, and if the corner remains undisturbed, you get a certain portion of that fee back, and if not, that fee goes then to resetting those monuments. And I really do appreciate that. That makes retracing in that area very easy. Thank you, guys. Jumping down, I think we're going to jump down to the end of the chapter here, 1611, and we're going to hit principles 7, 8, 9, and 10 real fast here, and then we'll jump over into the next chapter here and get more into the professional stature. But I'll just reread these real fast. These are really short ones. If a surveyor can be proven negligent in the performance of his or her duties, punitive damages may be awarded in addition to actual and contract compensatory damages. Principle 8, a surveyor should not contract to do work for which he or she is not qualified, educated, and experienced to accomplish. 9, a surveyor can be sued either in tort or in contract. With a written contract, the terms of the contract become the controlling elements. I like the paragraph under that. It says, studies indicate that 2/3 of the claims of negligence brought against surveyors are initiated by their own clients for whom they have conducted work. If the surveyor is working under a written contract, then the terms of the contract will be examined and will be controlling in claims of negligence. And I know Mentoring Mondays has covered a lot of some contract law stuff, so we can refer back to those weeks for that. But just making sure that we're covering ourselves and we're very clear about what we're doing. We want to cover ourselves so that we're not held liable, but we also want to perform work appropriately so that it doesn't come back on us. There's kind of two sides of that, protecting ourselves and then just doing a good job. And then finally, principle 10, and this is a tough one. We do it all the time, and we go back, we can go talk about history of surveying, and you can go find any old government surveyor, and say, oh yeah, this guy did it, or this guy was sitting in the bar and doing his township breakdowns, and we just know it's going to be bad. We can also have the same discussion now. We know there's surveyors that if I see their name, I almost implicitly trust their work, right? And some others that I know I need to retrace it just a little bit more. But part of our professional obligation, I'll say, what makes us professional is, even though we're all competitors, we still work together. I mean, the first thing I do when I see someone else's work that I have a question on or need help on is I'm always making a call. Maybe more than I should, but I want to have that professional discussion and raise the bar. So surveyors will contact colleagues and will often use recorded data or maps in doing retracements, not knowing the validity of the previous work. So just a caveat there, if we are reaching out, if we're using a survey to retrace, retracing a retracement survey or even an original survey, doing our due diligence to check that and make sure it works and fits is critical, right? And this whole book's been about gathering the evidence of why one is bad versus the other. I think that's the whole point of it, what we've been talking about. So I think that's a good one on there. Any questions, comments about this part of the chapter or this part of the book? Anything we didn't cover that you guys might want to before we jump into chapter 17?
Principle 10 is one thing that I think my engineers don't understand very well. They tell me, look, we did this topo, I don't know, 15 years ago. I'm just going to pull it and use it. And they realize a few things may have changed, but when you see someone else's work, especially, work from my own office when I wasn't here, it's a trust but verify situation. Or if someone else does really good work and you get a survey from them that you're expected to use, it's still a trust but verify situation. I just had to deal with this where I got work from a surveyor I really trusted, and I was asked to use it, and I verified his measurements were correct, but I didn't go back and verify that his determination was correct. And he had left out a 15-foot strip of a parcel that the county then called me on. And it was complicated to get that fixed. We got it working, but it was complicated to get it fixed. And there would have been a better way to do it if I would have done a little bit more verifying work. Fortunately, there's not any liability for me at this point because we fixed it. But I would have rather not have to deal with that. And there are even surveyors that have fairly large profiles. I'm not talking about you, John, but people who have done work for decades and decades. And there's a surveyor who did a lot of work in Summit County here in Utah that I've retraced now maybe 6 to 8 of his surveys in the last couple of years. And most of them looked pretty good, but there was one that was just dead wrong. And if I would have trusted that, it's now in a lawsuit. If I would have trusted that at face value without going back and verifying what was on the ground, I could have made myself much, much more liable than I ultimately am. The lawsuit is still kind of moving forward here, but so who knows how that'll turn out, just saying. But yeah, trust but verify is it doesn't matter who you do it with or whose work you trust or whose work you receive. You've always got to make sure that they did it right for this very reason.
Well said. Thanks, Jeremiah.
Yeah, even so along that same line, there's an issue down on the Las Vegas Strip that turned into a situation where the construction survey laying out, received the CAD files, kind of laid out the site, but the original surveyor did the engineering, had busted the angle on the line and created basically a triangle sliver, but it was about 4 feet in the back to basically 0 in the front. But on the strip, right, at thousands and thousands of dollars a square foot, it was multi-million-dollar encroachment. So it's can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Accidental errors happen to everyone.
Absolutely. That reasonable person is always involved in somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's jump over to 17 then. Professional stature. And again, a lot of the same discussion is going to happen, right? But instead of what liabilities we have is what makes us stand out from the rest. Really, is what I want to kind of focus on and think about. So, just right there, the first paragraph, and then we'll jump into some of these lists. When asked, surveyors identify with, believe they are, and espouse to be professionals, but seldom do we see in print what constitute professional standards. This discussion in this chapter in no way expresses what professional behavior should be. Facts and stated opinions were gained from discussions with varied individuals, reading and researching available literature, references relating to other professions and professionals, as well as references to case law from various states. So this is going to be a more philosophical chapter, essentially. And Trent just highlighted there, 17.2, an exact definition of the word profession is elusive. Each authority gives it new and varied meanings. In a narrow historical sense, created by English common law, there were three basic professions known as the professions: theology, law, and medicine. Today, those professions are limited to include doctors, clergymen, and attorneys. In a broad sense, professions include professional boxers, baseball players, football players, and many others also witnessed by personal claims as well as telephone directories. To expand on this, it is suggested that the students turn to the business page of their local telephone book, count the number of listings that start with the word professional. The following three court cases may serve to define the term. We know this is still an outdated book because they are referencing phone books.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, somebody missed that. I should text that to Tony. So you missed a section in here.
So before jumping into this, let's do like we do on every chapter. We'll just scroll down just a little further, and there's 15 principles that this chapter is going to try and cover. So principle 1, professional stature cannot be attained by self-proclamation. It must be earned, and others must bestow the title on the profession. Principle 2, superior and distinct education in a field of knowledge is one essential feature of a profession. Principle 3, the surveyor has the following obligations to the public. 1, to see that the client's boundaries are properly monumented without subtracting from the rights of the adjoiner. 2, not to initiate boundary disputes. 3, not to aid in unauthorized surveying practice. 4, to see that those licensed to survey are properly qualified by character, ability, and training. 5, to see that those who prove unworthy of their privileges have those privileges deprived. 6, to agree not to attempt to practice in any professional field in which one is not proficient. And 7, to produce a quality product regardless of the price. Principle 4.
Loaded. That one is loaded.
That's a whole chapter and week right there, right?
Oh
Principle 4, no surveyor should permit his or her name to be used in aid of or to make possible the unauthorized practice of surveying by any agency, person, or corporation. Principle 5, the surveyor does not attempt to injure falsely or maliciously, directly or indirectly, the professional reputation, prospects, or business of another surveyor. Principle 6, in the event of a property surveyor discovers an error or disagrees with the work of another property surveyor, it is the duty of that surveyor to inform the other surveyor of such fact. Principle 7, it is unprofessional to review the work of another property surveyor or work for the same client except with the knowledge or consent of such property surveyor, or unless the connection of such property surveyor with the work has been terminated. Principle 8, it is unprofessional to act in any manner or engage in any practice that will tend to bring discredit on the honor or dignity of the surveying profession. Principle 9, no division of fees for surveying services is proper, except with another surveyor who, by his or her license, is permitted to do property surveying work. Principle 10, it is unprofessional to take employment on a contingency basis. Principle 11, violation of professional or ethical standards may be considered as some evidence of malpractice. Professionals may have difference of opinions. Simply a difference of opinion will not constitute negligence. Principle 13, having a valid license does not make a professional. The license requirements are governmental requirements in order to practice surveying. Principle 14, the foundation of a profession of a profession is having a solid basis of education commensurate to the other professions. And principle 15, a true professional merges practical experience with formal education to attain the degree of sophistication needed to serve the client base. Which one do we want to cover first? I've got a lot of questions. We could form here and kind of talk and even come outside the book a little bit, but anyone else we want to cover or hit?
See, that to me, there's two classes there. There's one is the one that engages in paid work within the profession, and therefore they're calling themselves professional because that's what they do for living. And then the second class is somebody that actually epitomizes the high level of the professional ideals that embodies most of what we strive for as professionals, not necessarily where we live on average.
So I have a confession to make. When I fly, I like to dress up. Now, I'm not suit and tie and top hat dress up, but I'm not wearing my sweats and flip flops and whatever to fly. I actually do try and dress up a little bit more when I fly. That idea there, I think, is that second one you're saying, Connie. Like, there is this professional, if you'll say like the gentleman class, if you will, there's someone that takes their profession seriously and makes an attempt to actually do it properly and correct. I'm the same way with sporting events, though I'm more lax on that. I like the idea, the old school idea of we're going to get dressed up and go do this. And I see that a little bit when we talk about this professional, this nicer, more involved way of surveying or whatever it might be, right? But doing it right and presenting this professional air about us.
Yeah, where your mannerisms and your behavioral decorum is in sync with the way you treat your business endeavors as well, where you're not just gonna do the minimum, but you're gonna basically, to put your back into it, to put it simply, and strive to do it very thoroughly and carefully instead of just rush through it and act a little cavalier about it.
Along those same confessions as yours, Trent, but things that we have to adapt as well, right? And I think I've talked to you about it here. I've said it somewhere before, but in some of our marketing materials in the beginning, years ago, when we first started doing this, I photoshopped tattoos off of guys on our marketing material, right? Just because it wasn't as socially accepted as it is pretty much now, right? So things have to adapt at some point along the way, because things socially change, right? And so it is interesting how things have to adapt along the way.
Yeah, because wherever we're seen and wherever we communicate, where it's in public, we need to try and send a message and act in a ways that we want the profession to be seen and in the profession to be respected. So if we're not behaving, if we're not sending out the right message, if we're not presenting the way we want to be seen, or at least attempting to, then we can't be surprised that later on we're not being acknowledged and respected.
At the beginning of this chapter, the book kind of made this distinction. We're talking about professional versus not in our mannerisms, right? But they actually talked about this balance between being maybe the office professional and the rugged outdoorsman that we're known for in the past, right? And we go to a survey conference, and I had a mentor, and the first thing he said was, my first survey conference, like, dress nicely. You're going to a conference, you're going to a training, it's a group of professionals, and he warned me it would happen. But we show up, and 3/4 of the guy had their orange vest on and mud on their boots and dirty pants, and you know, and what does that show to if someone were to walk into that conference? And we're doing this for continuing ed to make ourselves better, to hit all these professional things we just talked about, right? That added step to make us separate from others. But then they walk into it and they see the muddy, rugged. But that is what surveying is. It is getting down in the dirt and searching for the corner, like Trent mentioned, getting up into the bush and actually looking in the bush to find the corner in the ground. You actually have to go out and do it, no matter what level you're at. To either have the experience or to support your crews and have reasonable charge.
In response to what you just said and what Connie was saying, kind of brings it together. When I back in the day when I was doing field work, I would go by like a Goodwill or a secondhand store, and I just pick up a lot of collared shirts and go through the poison oak or the blackberries or whatever. And, you know, maybe they only lasted 2 or 3 times in the field. That's toss them, but you know, they're only $6 or $7. And after a while, it caught on at that company, and then everybody started doing it. And we, you know, rather than just wearing the T-shirt or whatever underneath, just to have a collared shirt, even with the muddy boots and the jeans, I think it sent a message. And you know, especially when we're charging the rates that we are, and you know, we're playing with property boundaries, which are, you know, a huge part of somebody's wealth and estate. I think that it just made them more comfortable when they saw that as well. So just something I throw out there, little suggestion. Where I work now, we actually will buy clothing for the field crews, but back at that place we did not. And people would just show up in whatever, you know. And I think that little idea goes a long way.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And also, having said that, while I do appreciate the decorum and the effort, you do recognize that sometimes it's impossible. What makes that good or bad is the attitude that comes with it. So for example, if literally somebody comes in sweaty from the field and muddy and they didn't get a chance to change, and you really want them to be present, they can simply demonstrate by the attitude to say, hey, I'm sorry, I just came from the field, I didn't get a chance to change. The minimum that can be done is to acknowledge that they understand that they don't that they've acknowledged the decorum of the space they're entering. At the same time, the people from that space will return the favor and say, hey, you know what, it's no worries, you just came from the field, it's okay. But if they came in and leave a dirty tracks everywhere, and they act like, how dare you even say something, or they don't say, hey, sorry, I know this is not appropriate. You know, it's that understanding between the people. Everybody cuts each other a little bit of slack, and they come to a meeting of the minds, versus where you end up with a lot of headbutting, and that's where you get conflict and people looking down their nose at each other. That's not necessary. So this is where understanding of more than just your own environment of the minute it gets important, you know, where you have a broader perspective, and at the minimum you acknowledge that it exists, even if you can't at that moment act on it or fit with your behavior.
I think part of it also goes to knowing who your audience is at all times.
Yeah.
You have to know, if I'm going to, when I go to Reno this coming weekend, I will be wearing a suit, because that's what I do. I'm just like Trent, I like to dress up for it. But I also understand that pretty much everyone there is going to be surveyors, and we're going to have people that are just as comfortable in the jeans and the shorts, just as I am in a suit. And yeah, you have to understand who are you going to be talking to at any point in time. No, you can't get set up for everybody. Yeah, you're not going to please everybody at any one point in time. But the professional does have to think about that.
Yeah.
Yep. So I will throw, if I'm going to go meet with a contractor, I'll go throw my steel toes on. If I'm meeting a client or developer, even if it's on site, I may wear what I'm wearing in the office, right? So the idea is, and it's unfortunate, is that it sounds when you say it out loud, we are being judged by what we present. And when we look at trying to raise the stature of the profession from doing, those that do $500 boundary surveys, so those that are trying to get $2,000 for the same professional service, right? What we portray then indicates to that, because as a lawyer, they're always dressed to the nines. That's the image they portray. So taking that thought process, the image we portray, and I want to move that now into the education that we get. So jumping down to 17.5, Principle 2, it says formal education is not necessarily the only means of acquiring knowledge, since knowledge can be attained by experience and self-effort. At one time, many attorneys were admitted to the bar without the advantage of a college degree, but today that practice has been eliminated. Before an attorney is admitted to the bar, he or she must demonstrate the possession of superior education and knowledge. So here's an interesting thing. We're really on a precipice as the profession starts losing people of how do we get that knowledge, or is that knowledge a requirement to become a professional surveyor? I know I have my opinions. I've shared it on here, but in the context of this chapter, what do you guys think?
We've had this discussion last year in Las Vegas quite a bit with both Trent's and myself going around and around about how much education is necessary, and how some of us do have degrees and some do not, and the different states was the fascinating thing, was that which states require or do not require the professional education. But there's a lot of talk about in here about formal education and how much you should or do not need, and it's very interesting.
So I got an interesting topic that falls in line with this. As of about the last 4 weeks or so, our Nevada State Board is looking to remove the requirement to take the state specific exam. So as long as you pass a PS and the FS, apply for licensure, you do not have to take a state specific exam, and you get a Nevada license. Yeah, right.
Is that a cost thing? So in Salt Lake, so Jeremiah's on here. Jeremiah's father was Walt Cunningham, who was a huge advocate for the surveying profession. Even up to the NSPS, but definitely in the state of Utah, every surveyor knows Walt. Our education foundation's named after him. But after Walt retired and through the attrition of surveyors, they're talking about shutting down that program. And why that hurts, it really is a numbers game, right? For a university or college, they're there to make some sort of money, not just lose it because we need surveyors. Is that a funding thing at the state, or is that a professional discussion?
It's what they're trying to do is relax the barrier to entry, right? So for an engineer to get a license in the state of Nevada, it takes them 9 days. For a surveyor to get a license in the state of Nevada, it takes them like 275 days. So they're trying to break down the reciprocity barriers by speeding up the process. And so that's part of their thought process. Well, the pass rate, so as of last February, it went to an open book exam. Prior to that, we had less than a 50% pass rate. Now, with an open book exam starting in last February of 2022, we're sitting at an 85% pass rate on that state specific exam. So the argument would be 85% are passing now already. You learn in college how to look up and do research and this, that, and the other, right? And you're going to do that if you go practice in another state or whatever. And so that's kind of the argument behind it right now. But there's going to be some pretty heated discussions Sunday at our, we have our California, Nevada update. That's one of our sessions we always do at our state board updates at our conference. And then Monday, both in Nevada and in Reno, we're doing public forum workshops, input. So there's going to be some tomato throw in there.
What's your education requirement there?
4-year degree.
4-year degree. It is 4-year degree. Okay.
Yep.
Well, a couple of decades ago, the education issue really took off in the surveying profession based on a ruling that came down in the court in Florida, where they basically said that to qualify as a professional, you're required to have a minimum 4-year degree requirement of education. So you had to have a bachelor's degree if you could be considered a professional. And it was in the perspective of their liability statutes. Professionals had a certain liability statute that was applied to professions as opposed to the typical liability statute that went to the ordinary man theory kind of thing. And so in order to qualify under that statute, they had to be qualified as a professional. They didn't have the education, therefore they were not considered a professional and could not go with the shorter, it was statute of limitations. And so when that happened, matter of fact, they even mentioned in 1999, Florida now requires minimum 4-year college degree there at the last sentence. I didn't even see that till just now. But yeah, that's when it happened. And it kind of, initiated a storm across the country that, well, wait a minute, now we've got this ruling from the Supreme Court that says you've got to have this degree to, or some specific education at least to qualify as a professional in order to get in on those shorter term statutes of limitations. And so that kind of started the whole thing about, well, is an associate degree really enough? And we started getting more focus on bachelor's degree programs. But from the funding standpoint you're talking about, the real problem we have is just getting people in the seats. We're running programs that are 5 to 8 students in a semester program. It's not enough to be financially viable for the universities, and that's why they axe the programs, is because we're not putting bodies in the seats. And the only way we're going to, as a profession, change that is to make sure that our employees are in the seats, and give them incentive programs and incentivize them even when you're hiring. We'll hire you if you take this class and if you sign up for a class here, or focus on some education program at least, and get bodies in the seats. We've got enough companies around to fill every one of these programs. We ought to be getting 30 students at least in a semester class. But it's not happening, and it's a fault of our own profession, the way I see it. We're just not putting our employees, and we're not expecting them to get education. We're requiring them to have it for a licensure, but we're not expecting them to get it, and not doing anything to assist them in getting it.
Yeah, continuing education is a great thing, and those states that require it are, way in ahead of California. So everyone needs it. We need it. That would help a lot, just right there. But the other side of that is getting the kids young, like what Trent's doing, and advertising to get them more into the formal education also.
Yeah, I'll offer my 2 cents of this whole thing. We are very stuck in the dichotomy of, do we allow education or do we remove the educational requirement? And I am a big proponent of education. At the same time, I also recognize that there are some autodidactic ways of acquiring the knowledge, which could possibly be honored, exceptions made. I don't know, that's probably a little bit besides the point. But something that really strikes me whenever I listen to surveyors discuss this is that where we seem to be missing the boat is we have no transitional plan. There's no plan on how to get from the current state of education has mostly not been required, and people just land in surveying by accident because there's no clear career path. And now all of a sudden we're taking this mess and haphazard events and we're saying, oh no, we need education. We're going to put in their educational requirement, and the people who want to be surveyors through education and want to pay all the money are just going to magically appear. Well, real life doesn't work that way. And we've neglected to create a transitional plan. Now that some of these things have been put into place and kind of faltered in the last decade, I think more people are kind of seeing that a transitional plan, that all of us professionals need to look outside of just the technical requirements and use our broader education to to possibly get better at business management and come up with a transitional plan for the entire profession. How do we get from this point A to point B? And I know NSPS is involved in this to a degree. I've had many conversations at the state level in California, and one of the big points of frustration for me is just trying to explain the business planning to most of the surveyors is difficult, because even the existing professionals are not at the level of professional prowess, so to speak, where they understand business planning. So I'll talk to 15 surveyors and 3 will go, oh my God, this is great, because they've had some business planning experience, and the rest are going, oh my God, you're just being annoying.
Well, it's hard because, I'm finding that, that I have a day job, and then to go and do this outreach stuff. I'm this week in particular, I've probably got 15 hours that I'm taking out of my week, and part of this will be on Saturday of outreach, and so how do I keep my business going? I do it knowing that if I don't, I won't have people in 5 years to survey for me, right? My crew chief is getting older, and he's one of those that, came into the profession a little older, had already done some schooling, but didn't qualify to get towards licensure. And I use him as a good example because I agree with Connie. That's the type of person that he really could be a licensed surveyor. He understands it. He does it. He's a field guy, but he understands it well enough to go stamp a drawing if he had a stamp to do it, right? But he just doesn't qualify by our code. So I agree. There really should be, and I don't know, Trent. Maybe you could pull up your little poster. We were talking about it earlier. The 2 paths to surveying, and he is as much a professional when we talk about professionals as anyone that I have working for me. He's tatted up and gnarly, ex-army guy, but he's going to go talk with the landowner. He throws on a clean shirt out of the back of his truck. That type of guy. Why Trent pulls that up, Jason's been throwing a lot in the chat here, and I don't want to just overlook what Jason's been saying. But the last little bit he talked about a licensed electrician or plumber. They have 8,000 hours to get signed off, accepted passing test scores, and they're a journey license, and you get it to a master, right? There's this clear path for them. And so here's Trent's poster that he was talking about, at the very beginning of the hour here, that he's got a guy in his office that draws this up. But this is a great one that we show this when we do outreach programs, talking about how to become a professional surveyor. And I say professional surveyor, not professionally licensed surveyor. And I talk to kids about that, because you go talk to a high school kid, and there's people, and I'll ask it, I make a little joke. I say, okay, teachers, close your ears. How many of you kids don't want to go to college? And sheepishly, a few raise their hand, right? And surveying, become a professional surveyor, there might be a path for them. And maybe it is, some of these, a few classes, but then the hands-on, the mentorship, CST path to get in, on the job training path, or maybe the educational path as well. Go get a degree, sit down and do the university thing and come in and then take the same test. But I think that's critical. This and maybe that's something we throw on there. You know, about it is professional at the end either way.
And also there's more than one end game, so to speak, in professional surveying. You know, we need people in a number of different roles. Where there's going to be people who want to stay on a technician level. There's going to people who are going to strive to be a professional surveyor within a company. There's going to be people who strive for a broader, have more entrepreneurial spirit and become company owners. There's going to be people who are going to have extremely strong academics, and they're going to want to go into a master's and a PhD degree, and possibly into academia or research. So there's we don't have, it's not a single level of becoming a surveyor. You know, it's it's going to be a hierarchy of different, and not necessarily even a hierarchy, but different directions for different skills. And all of that needs addressing, all of that needs considering, you know, because somebody who wants to stay a technician for 20 years, I love to hire him, because you don't have to plan for when they outgrow their position. They're usually super good and efficient at what they do, and tend to be content and have other aspirations in life rather than just work, you know. And you can really build a solid department, having several people like that in the department. At the same time, you're going to need somebody else who's going to be pulling forward and thinking ahead and have broader skills. So a path possibly of entry and the education those two different people are going to need, it can be different, and accommodate what the industry needs. And that's another thing. We're always like, we're really focused on right now, because we have a shortage of licensed people, and the licensed people numbers are going down. And I don't know, it's critical, so it gets a lot of noise. But I also, again, I don't see any planning for how do we direct the whole profession? How do we accommodate the whole profession rather than just the current crisis?
I love it. I love the discussion. Let's move it on forward here through the chapter just a little bit. I rolled down to 1718, Trent, 1718, 1719. The surveyor's obligation to the client and the surveyor's obligation to other surveyors in the profession. So reading there at the top of 1718, it says, the surveyor, when performing a given service for a client, assumes certain ethical obligations in addition to liabilities, but these obligations to the client may not supersede or interfere with the surveyor's obligation to associates or to the public. He or she should serve clients faithfully, but should refuse to do that which is illegal and unethical, and that which violates a duty of responsibility to others. The surveyor advises the client about what is right and proper. However, if the client insists otherwise, the surveyor must withdraw, with notification being given to the client in writing. Regardless of the fee charged, the surveyor is obligated to perform a correct survey within the specified accuracies. I had a great client, met with him this week. We're doing a boundary survey for him in an old part of town. It's the old lot and block part. Centerline monuments have been gone for a long, long time. So, we're breaking down the block, and he's trying to get so many lots out of these two parcels he's bought. I'm trying to meet zoning. They're 10,000 square foot minimum lots, and all this stuff goes to, and he's just a hair short. And he says to me, and this is all, he understands the law, and that I wouldn't ever do that. But he's like, hey, can I just get a few more square feet back here? Can't we just, but there might be someone that does that, right? Oh yeah, we could interpret the boundary this way, and he does it just trying to make it work out, and tease me, but regardless of the fee charge, regardless of what we're trying to do, our obligation to surveyors is really, as to the client, is to be a neutral party, right? To not favor our client over someone else, but to gather all this evidence we've been talking about for the last year and come out with an ethical evaluation of where that boundary is in the ground. And then 1719, a surveyor's obligation to other surveyors in the profession. A professional is distinguished by the fairness and courteousness of one practitioner to another and the unwillingness to encroach on the clients of another. Businesses aggressively compete for customers. Professions do not. Members of a profession value the esteem of associates and the prestige of their calling, especially so for those of mature age. But those who steal another's clients do not induce cordial reception or pleasant relationship, as it ought to exist among surveyors. Surveyors not only have obligations to one another, but also to the profession as a whole. I love it. I actually got a call from a good surveyor friend from another company that picked up a job that we had preliminarily scoped, but the client chose not to go with us. And we were talking, and he brought up, he's like, hey, we're picking this up. Is there anything you can tell me? I understand you worked on it before. And, and he just kind of started the conversation. And I didn't, I'm not trying to steal this from you. I'm not taking it from you. They came to me, and our contract with the preliminary scoping was done. But I really appreciated his approach to it, that he was just very upfront about his approach, And I like this chapter. I think we talked, it's probably been 6 months ago, about marketing in surveying in one of the chapters as well.
Sometimes taking over those projects, it's an ethical thing as well, though, right? To make sure that the prior surveyor's been paid and up to date. And, that's, client might just be moving a project around so they can get it done and keep stringing every surveyor out, right? And so by not calling that prior surveyor, and he's got an open $10,000 balance, and he's never going to get it paid because some other surveyors already took up the work, right? And so that's the ethical side behind it, for sure.
Absolutely. Any other discussions, questions on our obligations? Obligations, I'm going to 17, 22, and 23, I think fall under that same obligations to the other surveyors. If we discover an error, or review someone else's work, give them a call, have that discussion, be upfront. That duty as surveyors, the professional part of that, is to the profession, as the book said, right? And that also helps with the public perception that we have. If we all disagree all the time and fight, I think that's part of the challenge we've had is whether we warrant it or not, that is the way we're portrayed in the public, right? The two surveyors can't agree. And we make light of that ourselves, but that's definitely part of that other obligation to our fellow surveyors and to the profession. And then I think the last bit, if we want to talk about it, is ethical and professional standards and professional standing of surveyors. Principle 11, violation of professional or ethical standards may be considered as some evidence of malpractice. So in this little bit, I thought I'd just throw it out here. When I was in Wisconsin, I chaired the Ethics and Standards Committee. And so any questions that got before the licensing board there first went through the State Society Standards and Ethics Committee, and we would review it and write a letter, and try and keep surveyors from getting dinged at the licensing board level, and see if we couldn't make corrections, within our society. But throw some discussion out there, things you like, don't like, would want to change, opinions about how we hold each other accountable.
One thing that's been,
I was gonna say, it's preaching to the choir, right? The ones that it's the ones that never show up to the meetings, never show up to the conferences. It's all those are the ones, right? So we always, this particular platform, we're preaching to the choir. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the recording, I mean, I guess to reiterate, through your professional associations and even through your peer networks, it's always good to use those avenues to promote professional standards, or not the minimum standards, but things to aspire to, and exemplary. I forgot what word I was fishing for. for exemplary, not just behaviors but performances and ideas that we should all at least attempt to achieve.
I've got a drafter that works for me. She drafted for years in Arizona. That's where she's from originally. And she comes up here. She says, and I don't know, I haven't served in Arizona. Trent, you're closer to that area, but she says surveyors in Arizona are cutthroat. They'll report you for anything, she said. But surveyors in Utah, she's like, you guys don't care about anything. You just let it all slide. But she always teases me about that, when she sees something happen.
And I'm gonna follow up on that too. So I was licensed in Minnesota and Wisconsin first, and I'm working on my California licensure. And I see a big difference between the moral obligation to be professional within the Midwest versus out here in California. Not saying that it's bad, but I think a lot of the undue necessary heartfelt problems that you could have is because they don't go out and reach out to their previous surveyor or talk to them about maybe there was a record of survey that was inconsistent with their findings before they do the blame game and then file a thing or a grievance at a board. That seems a little bit harsh to me. As far as professional liability goes, it would be better if the profession would consider like a mediation maybe they get in California before they take it to the next level, but that's just my 2 cents.
I
And that's why we
think
have the joint professional practices committees in California
I was
to
about to
use.
say that.
And we have had here at the County of Orange, we have had some luck with surveyors that we can't get a hold of to do revisions to their maps. We don't want to, it just blow us off. We've been able to reach out to the Joint Professional Practices Committee, and they've been able to send a correspondence to the surveyor, and we have had some luck with that. So sometimes that does work, but there are always people that out there that also will just blow you off too and don't care. So you've got both sides here for any profession that you're in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Connie.
Oh no, I was just gonna piggyback and add that there's in California I think it just took a number of years to develop the situation that we have now, where you have people that will only do the bare minimum, and they're going to say, well, are you going to turn me in? Or the law says I only have to do this and I will not do one step more, and so sue me. And that has, on the other hand, created another faction that has a tendency to go heavy-handed with policing, and we're losing sight of middle ground, I think, to a degree, and probably a little bit of corrective measures through associations and peer pressure and some other avenues that I haven't thought of yet would probably serve to soften the situation that's happening right now and possibly make headway in elevating the profession and elevating the standards.
Yeah, the Standards and Ethics Committee that we have here in Utah, we have in the past on several occasions kind of acted as in a sense, mediating between clients and surveyors, as well as between surveyors themselves. Two surveyors cannot come to an understanding or a mutual agreement on what the outcome of a survey should be, or whatever they're going to be fussing over. they can come to the committee, and we'll hear what they have to say, and we'll help them come to a consensus, give them kind of a peer review of what's going on, and give them thoughts of kind of a roundtable discussion of, yeah, here's where we see you could go, or you could consider this or consider that, and we can't make them do anything, but getting them to sit down in front of a peer review really brings them up short enough to want to sit and pay attention and come up with some alternatives, and hopefully discourage lawsuits or potential actions against a client or against the surveyors themselves, and to get some unity in their decisions. It's not good to have two different surveyors giving two different answers on the same boundary. It puts the general public in a quandary. They have no recourse other than to hire a third surveyor and go the best 2 out of 3. I mean, they don't have any choice, and so it's up to us in the profession to make sure that we give them a good just decision on their boundary, and whatever we can do as a profession to help our individual surveyors come to that uniform decision, we need to try and do it.
Okay, well, wonderful. That gets us really to the end of what I was hoping to kind of hit and cover this week. So really, we only have one chapter left. So we have 18 and 19. But if we open up 19, Trent, if you want to click on 19 real fast, this is just basically court cases and what kind of come out of them. I don't know that we want to, and you guys can tell me if you disagree. I don't know if we want to spend our time just reviewing court cases. I think and I hope we've got out of this book what we've hoped to, but I would like to cover 18, the surveyor in court. And this one, John, I would ask you, you're more familiar with the court process. If you wouldn't mind helping kind of lead that discussion, for sure. I'm going to reach out to some of our other surveyors that deal with that and know that better, but that is one arena I've never had to deal with the court process. So I can read the chapter, but you guys can definitely add more color to the discussion. And so we'll be done.
The end.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that at all. It's my life.
Right, exactly. We're doing a mock trial with Gary Kent at our conference on Tuesday, so it's only going to be 4 hours. But we did the mock trial last year with Jeff Lucas as well. That was a fun one. But I get to play the plaintiff's attorney. We got 117 pages of script.
Oh wow!
So that'll be fun.
Get an earpiece for your lines.
I know, right? we got the script there, but yeah, it's pretty crazy. So those are always fun. If anybody's ever done those mock trials at a conference, they're a blast. So
yeah, I went last year, and we did one 2 or 3 years ago here in Utah. And,
yeah,
it was interesting. The thing about it is we read these court cases and think it's pretty cut and dry, but I mean, there's some color you guys can add to those court mock trials, but I think every one of them, we got an argument for an hour afterwards about, well, what about this? What, all this other stuff from the peanut gallery behind that this didn't get answered. And I think that's what maybe we'll get into next time in chapter 18 is a lot of it depends on how and what was actually presented and who the lawyer is and how good they are at their job to present and argue versus the other person.
that's fun. So since it's the last chapter, it would be April 12th. Do you want to move it any other weekend, or is that our weekday? Is that still good for everybody?
That still works for me. Okay. And then right into Waddles after that.
Yeah, and we can look at that one too and see how we want to handle that, because usually even like the mentoring, we don't get a lot of participation during the summertime. So I wonder if we almost wait till the fall or whatever, but So we'll see.
I'm not sure that I would be opposed to that. So let's talk about it. I got to go open. I've been focused on this, so I haven't actually opened it to see how bad that's going to be.
Yeah, no,
Marvelous is a short one. We may end up combining quite a bit of that, or it may end up taking 3 weeks for each chapter. So
right. Okay, sweet. Okay, well, April 12th, we'll plan on it again. Finish this book. That'll be almost it's like a couple weeks shy of a month, or I mean a year to
a year,
to
yeah.
Christmas up, so,
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
yeah, we
That
started
was a
May
huge
something.
effort.
Yeah, it was. It's fun.
You guys did really good. I mean, I only pipe in every once in a while, but
it's fun.
it's been really good.
Yeah, it's been a blast. So
It's been fun.
I want to know what Trent's drinking so I can have some of it, because he manages to accomplish so much. I want to learn how.
right? It's fun.
Hey, I won't tell you that as you guys are talking, I'm quickly reading the chapter for the first time.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, guys.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
All right.